So guys, we all know that there's a lot of uncertainty right now around immigration. So many migrants are just wondering, should we buy a house in the UK? Is this a good time? Should we leave it? What if we have to leave the UK eventually? There's just a lot going on and people are kind of scared because they don't know what next to expect or what's going to happen next. So that's why I had to bring an expert, a mortgage advisor, to answer all the questions that you might have, especially regarding if this is a good time to buy a house in the UK as a migrant. This video is truly packed. You're going to get so much value from it. So please stay with us while we go straight into it. So my guest is going to introduce himself right now for those who have not seen him before, for those who might not know him.
Perfect. Thank you, Tochi. Good to be here. My name's Ripley Salguero. I'm the founder of First Time Finance. First Time Finance is a mortgage brokerage that helps people that have moved over to the UK to buy their first home here. So on the topic of mortgages for people that have moved over to the UK, I would consider myself an expert or the expert in the space. So hopefully I'll be able to help today with all your questions.
Thank you so much for coming. We're happy to have you here once again.
Thank you.
Right. So we understand that a lot has been going on around immigration, okay? And there's even been a lot of debates going on online, whether it's a good time to buy a house or not. So I just want to ask you, for those on skilled worker visas, health and care worker visas, when is a good time or when is not a good time to buy a house? Is there even anything like a good time to buy a house in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say this. I think waiting for the perfect time to buy a property is the real risk. There's actually a saying that goes, time in the market is better than timing the market. And I think that is really true, because what that means is that if you spend a long time in a market, whether that's buying a property or whether you're investing in stocks or whatever it might be, that generally beats trying to find the perfect time to jump in, right? So people commonly think, right, if I wait until house prices dip this 10% and then I can buy and then they go back up, I'm going to make more money. But ultimately, none of us are absolute experts in what's going to happen with property prices, particularly if you're looking at buying your first home. It's just not something that you're going to have the access to the data or be able to see into the future of what's going to happen. So I just think if you're looking to buy a property, you would like to buy your own home, it's better to just decide that, go ahead and purchase and have a bit of a longer term plan. So
you're saying there's not a perfect time. Just anytime you're ready to buy a house is the best time.
Yeah, I mean, look, of course, it would be better if you could buy a property for less and the interest rates were super, super low, but ultimately none of us really know. And I think the thing with it is when property prices drop, it's typically when interest rates are higher. That's because when interest rates go higher, the demand eases a little bit. When interest rates come back down, the demand increases a little bit. So therefore, if you wait for lower interest rates, typically what you'll see is slightly higher asset prices. So ultimately, you're kind of choosing between, okay, I can wait for a lower property price, but then I'm probably getting higher interest rates, or I can wait for a lower interest rate and I'm getting a higher property price. So the two things can tend to even themselves out.
Right. Just to add to that, I would say, yes, true. From my experience, I'm not an expert, but from my experience, I know that the best time to buy a property in the UK as a migrant is now, or whenever you have your deposit ready, because that's the most important.
Yeah.
Your money. Yeah. Okay. So now we can't talk about getting a mortgage. We start talking about lenders, right? So how do lenders really view skilled workers or migrants basically? And do you think anything has changed recently since this whole immigration challenge and everything going on?
Yeah, it's an interesting time at the moment, isn't it? Because of all of the, I guess, the immigration challenges and what's being discussed on the politics side and how that might change. And I completely understand why that would make someone that has moved over to the UK, someone that still doesn't have indefinite leave to remain, uncertain and a bit worried. Interestingly, from the mortgage lender's perspective, they're actually more open to lending to visa holders than ever. And those two things don't really seem to make sense together, but it is the truth. So the recent uncertainty on the politics side of immigration hasn't actually changed the lenders' views negatively. So we've recently seen in the last 6 months, I think it's somewhere between 5 and 10 lenders that weren't in the market to lend to visa holders unless they had a 25% deposit, now changing their requirement to only needing a 10% deposit. And some of those even will accept as little as 5% deposit. On top of that, we've had interest rates gradually reducing as well. So that ultimately means that clients can secure a mortgage with a lower monthly payment. So I think those two things hand in hand make it a good time. Of course, as I said, I understand why people would be a bit uncertain with everything going on.
Yeah. So in other words, things are changing for good and not for bad.
Yeah, definitely good on this side for sure. And I hope. I mean, it goes without saying, doesn't it, what both of our thoughts would be about some of these suggested changes and how silly they are, and that they've obviously asked people to move over to the UK to help. We needed people coming over, particularly in kind of care roles, NHS, things like that. And now they're talking about turning around to those same people that they've asked to come over here to help us and saying, oh, sorry, we're changing the goalpost, and now we're saying you need to have been in the UK for 10, 15 years. And it just doesn't make sense to me. And I really hope they see sense. I know there are people challenging this in Parliament at the moment. So fingers crossed.
Okay, now that you mentioned this 15 years plan that the government has been talking about for a while, right? What do you think? Do you advise people to go ahead and buy a house now, despite the fact that ILR might be 10 years or 15 years? Because if, for example, the government decides to increase ILR to 10 years or 15 years, and then for somebody who has bought a house already, what now happens when they have to leave the UK, or they lose their sponsorship or something? Because this is like question or people's fear.
Yeah.
Right. What happens to the property, to the mortgage?
I think it depends on the person, firstly. So I think what people need to consider is how much does that change in rule, if it happens, actually affect what they're going to do and what their plan is. So if that happens, if your decision is going to be, well, I'm going to stay in the UK because I've been here 3, 4, 5 years already, and I've built my life here and things are going well, kids are in school, so nothing changes, then ultimately nothing's really changed. Yes, it's become more difficult and that's frustrating, but if your plan has stayed the same, I don't think that affects anything on the mortgage side. It's all about your plans. If that might change your plan, and I think it's a good time to start thinking about that now, then it might be worth considering your options. I think when you're buying a home, it is a long-term decision. When I say long-term, I don't mean 10 to 20 years. I'm really talking about, I think you should be thinking about the next kind of three to 5 years and knowing, okay, right, we're going to be wanting to stay in this area in the UK, kids are settled, or we're settled in our jobs, and then at least you can make the decision to buy from a perspective of, we know what our plan is. So I think if you know what your plan is for the next 3 to 5 years, I think that's quite a lot of certainty. It's as much certainty as most people have. I certainly don't know much about what I'm going to be doing with my life after the next 5 years. You can only kind of plan ahead in the next few years, right? To touch on one of the concerns you mentioned about if someone was to lose their sponsored job or their sponsorship and had to leave the UK, for example, which is a good thing to talk about, you're right, because this is a real question on people's minds and is a real concern, and I understand why. To simplify this, they would have two main options. The first would be keeping the property and renting it out. So if you'd already bought a home and then you had to leave the UK, it is possible to keep the property and rent it out as an investment. In order to do that, they would need to request consent to let from their existing lender. This is exactly what it says. It's where they go to the lender and say, okay, I'm moving outside the UK, lost my sponsorship. can we rent out the property to cover the mortgage? The lender most of the time will say yes without any issues. In that case, you would still own the property, you would get the rental income, you'd be able to pay your mortgage, and it would be fine as long as you could get a tenant in place. Of course, the rental market in the UK is pretty crazy. There's lots of demand, there's not a huge amount of supply, so that generally shouldn't be an issue. The second option that I mentioned is selling the property. Now, the process of doing that, as you all know, Tochi, in terms of buying property, is fairly slow. It can take 3 to 6 months. So that's something to consider. There will be some fees to pay, like legal fees, estate agency fees, but it's a viable option. One other consideration here is early repayment charges. So when we arrange a mortgage, we'll typically have a fixed rate at the beginning of, let's say, 2 to 5 years. If you were to sell the property and repay that mortgage within the first 2 to 5 years, within the fixed period, there would be an early repayment charge to pay to the lender. Now, this means quite a lot of the time, a combination of those two options that I've mentioned actually works out to be the best solution. Because let's say you had a 2-year fixed rate, you're 1 year through this fixed rate, so you've got 1 year left. You had to leave the UK. You could get consent to let for 1 year to cover that remainder of the fixed rate. And when the 1 year is up, if you wanted to sell the property, you could decide to sell it, and then you wouldn't have any early repayment charges. So it's all about planning ahead. This is a conversation that we do have with clients. We talk about it up front. We make sure that we're planning for all options.
That makes sense. And I will also say that I feel like it shouldn't really, yes, the uncertainty is there and a lot of people are panicking, but I don't really think it should be a problem. Like, people shouldn't put their lives on hold because of the uncertainty. You should still do what you want to do, and eventually, if you feel like you want to leave the UK and stuff, you can always sell, like Ripley has said, or know what to do with it, really, or rent it out. So it shouldn't really stop you from buying your property, because at the end of the day, it's yours. It's not for the government. It's your house. So.
Yeah, I mean, how frustrating would it be if someone waited 15 years, for example, and then got their ILR and then went, oh great, I want to buy a house now, and then suddenly it's how much more expensive. If you look at how property prices have changed in the last 15, 20 years, it would be a lot more expensive on that basis. So yeah, I think inaction in that regard can be costly, but yeah, it's important to consider all the risks.
And thinking about it, what if you don't have to leave the UK? What if? So you still be renting for 15 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. I think long term, if I've been talking about kind of the difference, right? And this is something I get asked all the time is, right, okay, what's the difference long term between kind of renting and buying a property? And the thing is, you're right. What's the other option? I mean, we could play this out really with a comparison without looking too much at the numbers. I think if we talk about the numbers, it becomes very complex, but a simple comparison, I think, can clear it up for people. If we were to look at a period of someone's life, right? So if we compare two people, let's say person A rents for their whole life, person B buys a home at, let's say, age 35, for example. Person A, who's renting, will still be renting when they retire. The rent continues to get higher, doesn't it, over your life? I mean, how much have rents increased over the last few years? It's crazy. So when they retire, their income goes down, so they can't afford this rent that keeps going up. So what would they have to do? They'd probably have to downsize, or maybe even relocate to a cheaper location away from friends or family, because that pension income is not enough. Even if they decided, let's say, to move back to their home country, right, and they go, right, I want to move back, they wouldn't have any equity built up like person B would if they bought a property. So let's say person B, on the other hand, has then paid their mortgage off by age 65. When they retire, potentially they'll have hundreds of thousands of pounds in equity. They could then have the flexibility to stay in that property if they wanted to, or they could sell and downsize, and then they would have some money left over. Or if they decided to move back to their home country, maybe they would have hundreds of thousands of pounds for their retirement to buy a home, and think about how much you'd be able to do with that. So To answer your question, Tochi, in a very long-winded way, is a no-brainer for me long term if you're looking at it over a long period.
That's true. So now there's something that was going on online not quite long ago where some people were saying that mortgage is a scam. I found that quite funny, but then I want to hear from your professional point of view. What do you think about this? Because the people that might be watching us that might have seen that or even believe that there's no need because mortgage is a scam.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, interesting question. This, I know we'd actually spoken about it before on another day a little bit, and I have no idea where this comes from. Firstly, it's completely incorrect. I was looking into this. It was a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's around 70 to 80% of UK home purchases involve a mortgage. So I think that's quite compelling to say, right, mortgages are clearly not a scam if pretty much 4 out of every 5 people are buying with a mortgage. The people that don't buy with a mortgage are typically investors as well, if they've got loads of cash or investment. So really, if we're looking at people buying their own home, it will be a higher percentage than that. My question to these people would be, if you don't use a mortgage, how will you buy? We just spoke a minute ago about the alternative of not buying long term, and that didn't sound very good. So if you want to buy a property but you're not going to use a mortgage, how will you do it? The average house price now, a new bit of data came out, I think it was from Halifax, says that the average house price is over £300,000 now in the UK. So using a mortgage is really the only way to buy for most people. And actually, a mortgage is a relatively low cost way of borrowing money. At the moment, interest rates range between about 3.5% up to about 5% for most buyers. The same people that say mortgages are a scam probably have a car loan, right? A lot of people do have car loans. And I can tell you for a fact that car loans are much more expensive in interest than the interest rates I've just mentioned. So no, I do not think mortgages are a scam. I'll use my parents as an example. I hope they don't mind. But they bought a home obviously many years ago, and they're getting towards the like later stages towards retirement, and they'll be paying off their mortgage soon. So now they'll own a home without any mortgage at all, and that's the goal, right? I'd like one of those people to say to my parents, your mortgage was a scam, because they'd laugh and say, well, no, this is like my entire retirement is in this property. So yeah, I think that's all I've got to say on that one.
Yeah, and then you even forgot to mention the equity that would have built up on that property.
Yeah, I mean, like we were saying a moment ago with the comparison versus renting, it's person A versus person B, isn't it? You could have hundreds of thousands of pounds built up in the property. Yes, you pay interest. People go, oh, but there's an interest rate, and if you look at how much interest you pay over the long period, it's this much.
Yeah. They wouldn't go ahead to add the insurance, the cover. I'm like,
it doesn't. Yeah, that's not how it works. Getting insurance, you have to be insured to be protected. It's not like this additional thing. You should have it anyway, whether you own a home or not. And if you add up rent, how much is that going to be? So,
yeah. Thank you very much. Honestly, maybe people will be convinced now hearing from the experts. So finally, I just want to add or ask, from your experience so far, what do you think is the common mistake or most common mistake that migrants make when it comes to mortgages and things like that?
I'll touch on 3. So the first one's credit issues. That's things like missed payments, utility bills, credit cards, that kind of thing. Just be very careful. When you move to the UK, the credit system is very different. You'll hear, oh, you need to get a credit card, you need to spend, you need to use it. But it's very important that you don't miss any payments. So take out one credit card, for example, use it for a small amount and clear it each month. Just be very careful. The second one would be deposit issues. Now that's getting a deposit from, let's say, for example, Agile, where lenders don't accept it, and it can cause problems. You can end up losing money. Also not saving early enough. The sooner that you start saving for your deposit, the better. So get ahead of the curve with that. And the final one I would mention is just trusting the wrong sources. So if you're doing research online about how to get a mortgage as a visa holder or speaking to just any mortgage broker, you will likely hear generic advice. And they might say, and we hear this all the time, you need a 25% deposit, you need ILR to buy, which are all, of course, false.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Like, we've gotten so much knowledge from you today, just free of charge. Because I know that to get this knowledge or this much information from an expert, sometimes you need to pay fees, consultation fee, and all that. But we're getting it for free. So thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And if people do want to speak separately, we do have a free consultation as well. So if you reach out to us at First Time Finance, we can have a chat, talk about your situation specifically, and guide you forward.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. I'm going to leave their contact details in the description of this video. So do well to contact them and get started on your mortgage journey or property buying in the UK. They've got you, okay? All the advice, everything you need to speak with them about your circumstance, your situation, whatever. They are there to help guide you and help you buy your home in the UK. So thank you so much, Ripley, for coming. And thank you, everybody, for watching. I'll see you guys in my next one. Bye.